Welcome, it's the Matt Sager Podcast, Monday, March 4th, 2019. And let's start with the good, all right? Because there's a lot to be happy about today. There is. The premiere, as I record this, about 10 to 10 Eastern Time, the premiere of Captain Marvel is in full swing, and to the best of my knowledge, contrary to all the reports that they were going to review bomb, which undoubtedly they still will, but no one gives a shit, that they were going to somehow make this an unpleasant day for Captain Marvel, for Brie Larson, for Sam Jackson, or for anyone involved with the movie, including fans, the weird haters of comics who I don't quite understand why they've got YouTube channels and active social media accounts dedicated to just shitting on comics. They have not succeeded in making Captain Marvel a negative experience, and that's wonderful. Similarly, I recorded much of this show yesterday. I threw it all out, but I did a whole show last night to air today because everyone was telling me, and by everyone I'm talking about like NORAD, the Weather Service, SAG-AFTRA sending me an email saying, oh, we're closed. NYU sending me an email, we're closed. Today was supposed to have been a snowpocalypse here in New York, and it wasn't. It was like 60 degrees and sunny, which is odd. Because late last night, I rescheduled a ton of stuff thinking everything was going to be closed, and apparently much of it was, but everyone was prepared to work today. The weather was fine. It's going to be one day this week or this month, because science has gone completely crazy as we've abandoned the idea of ever doing anything right by the environment. So one day this week or month, there'll be a notification in my weather app. This is not a paid plug. I'm just saying I use the top-rated weather app. I believe it's the top weather app on the iOS App Store, Dark Sky. I also go to Yahoo Weather, weather.com. I use the native iPhone app. They're never right. Eventually, there's going to be, like, Wednesday will be 70 degrees and sunny, and that will be the day that turns into a snowpocalypse, when I'm going to be out there in shorts with no protection, and New Yorkers just go feral on one another, because when it's cold and snowy, adding to the already bad environment of too many of us in one little place, things get real kind of Lord of the Flies. When people are out there expecting a warm, nice day, and it turns out to be snowy, oh boy, you don't want to be fighting with anyone over who gets first dibs at a cab, over who gets to sit where, if anyone gets to sit at all on crowded subways and buses. But as I said, today was fine, with a notable exception. I'm not surprised by the outpouring of sadness and support from people who've worked with him. I'm surprised that it's affecting me to the degree it is. The news that Luke Perry passed away today. You know, he's a youngish guy, particularly in this day and age in which a guy like me in my 40s doing a podcast about video games and comics, you know, we think we're young forever. And Luke Perry was young. He was never as young as he was cast to be. I remember there was a joke on The Simpsons about, we're talking like season 4 or 5 when 90210 was a big thing. And it is true that Luke Perry was in something like his mid to late 30s, playing a high school kid with, you know, laughter lines and, you know, he's a human being. He's immortal. When you hit your 30s, you start to show signs of age, which is totally fine. It's only odd if you're cast as a rebellious high school student and the guy playing your dad is like 5 years older than you. Now, of course, he escaped that typecasting in many ways. The thing about Luke Perry is that the roles that in many ways defined him, certainly that big breakout role on 90210, kind of failed to really take full advantage of his talent. And yes, for any actor of any age, that role was huge, and what he's done since has been amazing. And it's not as though he were typecast and that he's always been this rebellious teenager. I think in particular about maybe like 4% of you, even my audience, will get this reference. But after Babylon 5, one of J. Michael Straczynski's TV projects that he did, I believe, on Showtime, was a series that I'm pretty sure was an adaptation of a French comic. It was called Jeremiah. And the star, the titular Jeremiah, was Luke Perry. This thing went way under the radar, not only for a JMS show, but certainly for a Luke Perry project. And his main co-star on the show was Malcolm Jamal Warner. And while it was an imperfect show, as all shows are, it was a very early, very good example of a lot of the kinds of TV tropes and storytelling techniques that we're really only seeing the full realization of what they were experimenting with now. Like, for instance, Jeremiah is in many ways, it's an age-specific kind of apocalypse, but it is a post-apocalyptic show. And the degree to which, I don't know Robert Kirkman, and I don't know what inspires him. And it's not as if he's the only guy on the Walking Dead TV show. But looking back at some of those episodes of Jeremiah today, not only made me very, very sad about Luke Perry, made me realize how underutilized he was. What a really broad, open-hearted, and open-minded performer he was. But I could not help but think that, wow, The Walking Dead has borrowed, it seems, rather liberally from this show. And I don't mean that to be an accusation, nor do I even know it to be true. But before there was a Walking Dead, years before, this show experimented to great effect with the idea of rebuilding a world after the apocalypse. It's a great show, and I recommend it very very highly. Both seasons, again, this is not a plug, not a paid one anyway, but I was able to watch because both seasons are streaming on Hulu. Season 2 is streaming on Amazon Prime, whereas season 1, you've got to buy it. So, since I've got them all, I'm just watching them for free on Hulu. I recommend it very highly if you're a fan of these types of shows and if you're thinking about Luke Perry and if you're like me and it's both. It will make you sad. I met Luke Perry once and it wasn't any kind of a momentous occasion. I don't think he'd have remembered me, if we ever met again. I'm not even sure I'd remember him. But there are certain types of actors who take the best of what is taught in acting to heart and sort of always have it on as part of them. And that idea is a word I used earlier in tonight's show, I believe. Wholeheartedness. It's something you hear a lot of, particularly when you're doing like Meisner technique or any kind of method acting, about being wholehearted, open-hearted, giving fully of yourself to your scene partner and to your audience. And of the really gifted actors who take those lessons to heart and incorporate them, I find they often fit into one of two categories. That they're either kind of selfish with the rest of their time, because when they're performing, they're giving everything. So when they're not performing, they just shut down. Like, what do you want to talk to me? There's no script, no cameras rolling. Give me a little bit of freaking me time. And I understand that. But there's another kind, the kind I would lump Luke Perry in with, who take these ideas of wholeheartedness, ideas that may well have propelled them and inspired them to act in the first place, to share their creativity, to be open and honest and generous with the world. And so when you're around these people, you go, wow, especially if you live in where actors tend to congregate, one of the two big coasts, New York or Los Angeles. In my case, it was New York, but it is not terribly common to find tons of people, particularly in the entertainment industry and especially performers, who are like, oh, hey, I don't know who you are, but come on in. Let me give you as much of my time and answer whatever questions I can. Let me help you as much as possible. Nice to meet you. I'm Luke Perry. How the hell are you? That was my experience with Luke Perry. It was in 96 or 7 on a film set, and it really was less than 5 minutes. But he didn't leave the kind of impression that I thought about him much between then and now, but he made the kind of impression that hearing this news really upset me. As I said, more than I would have expected for someone who I did not really know. Maybe it's his comparative youth, as I said. He's 52, and it turns out, when I heard a couple days ago that Jerry Lee Lewis, who's, I believe, 83 or 84, had a minor stroke and was basically doing fine. And on the same day, Luke Perry suffering a massive stroke and a total information shutdown, which is never good. It means you're going to hear something very bad within a few days, in my experience. And in this case, it was true as well. And it shocked me and led me to read up on why on earth would a guy generally healthy, guy who struggled with issues, as have we all. Listen, none of us. I can tell you stories that would really depress you. I'm perfectly fine. I'm doing the podcast, everything else, but life does get unpleasant. It throws you some curveballs, and Luke Perry was no exception. But he was not a candidate for one of these morbid death pools or someone to watch and hope that he's healthy. Nothing like that. And yet he had a massive stroke that ended his life. And so I read up on why that might be. And it turns out, boy, does science ever get depressing. Medicine and biology especially. I don't mean to keep inflaming religious groups on this show. That's never something I set out to do. But man, when I go to the doctor and hear stuff about myself, and when I read this about Luke Perry, I go, whoever's pushing this idea of intelligent design is full of shit. Because we're designed terribly. Human beings are basically the Edsel of the world. So it turns out regarding strokes, the younger you are, the more dangerous they can be in many cases, as in Luke Perry's. That generally speaking, if you were to take a group of people who've had strokes between the ages of 50 and 80, the ones that lead to a very quick and awful death tend to be closer to Luke Perry's age. And the reason for that is that once you hit 60, 70, whatever, the more common ages for a stroke, your brain has shrunk a bit in size. And somehow that does something. I know, listen to me, Mr. Science. I hope that at least by being as ignorant as I am, you understand that I'm just telling you what I read and urge you to read up more if you're interested. But apparently, the older you get, the more your body sort of prepares you for stuff like strokes and does stuff like shrinking your brain so that you're less likely to have a fatal incident. And I can't believe the podcast has gotten this dark and this depressing. But I'm really broken up about Luke Perry, and I'm surprised. I mean, any death matters, and you shouldn't have to be someone's friend or someone's fan to go, wow, this is heartbreaking. But it's still kind of, I guess you're just never ready for this kind of news. Riverdale, on which Luke Perry had been playing Archie's dad, Fred Andrews, they've shut down production because everyone's grieving. They're mourning. People who've been working around him for maybe 24 months. From the showrunners to the writers to his fellow cast members and the crew, they're not functioning. They're broken down today. And while some might argue that's just basic common decency, I would also argue that they are really clearly, obviously heartbroken. If you look at the social media accounts of anyone from head writer Roberto Aguirre-Sacasa to his fellow cast members on Riverdale, as well as people who worked with him way back when on 90210 and in between on projects like Jeremiah, everyone is really torn up about this, and that speaks to a life well lived. And it speaks to what I was saying before, that I, who spent maybe 3 minutes barely doing anything with the guy, felt a sense of warmth that I don't often feel among my neighbors here in New York and among my coworkers in the entertainment industry. It's like you know a good soul when you spend a few minutes talking with them, that their honest and direct answers, because that's all they've got time for, are uttered with care and consideration and an obvious concern for everyone he's working with and a clear respect that is like the default for anyone he's speaking to about even the most really mundane subjects. I want to make it real clear. I had no special interaction with Luke Perry. I talked to them about getting ready for a scene. He got ready for the scene. That was it. 3 minutes is probably overstating it. But this is not about me. This is about losing a really, really great guy. And I guess what I would like to take from this, and I would urge you to do the same, is that while not being morbid, understanding what a precious gift life is and that there's nothing more important than other people. And it's way too common that you find out after the fact. Just like you don't realize how dependent you are on money until you go broke. Just as you don't really think that much about water until you're in the desert. There's really nothing more valuable to people than other people. And we really are these sort of ticking time bombs. Don't wake up and assume it's your last day on Earth, but maybe think about the people in your life who you love. Maybe they don't even inspire something that deep in you, but they're just always good to be around. And think about how rare that is. Not shitting on the human race here either, but really, think about the rarity of someone who is consistently kind, generous, and giving, and realize that there is no currency worth more than that. And hold on to that. Make sure they know how you feel about them without being all, weird, and don't make them uncomfortable, but love the people in your life if they're lovable. Be they family members, coworkers, whatever industry you're in, whether you're an actor or whether you work for the post office, it's all the same thing. People need people. And while it's certainly not the case that everyone who's a good person is rewarded in life, and while it would be weird of you to find someone who you enjoy being around and who is consistently pretty pleasant and kind, who you respect and who you know respects you back, it would be weird if you showed them affection every day. It would make you both very uncomfortable, I would imagine. I'm trying to imagine what it'd be like for me to be on the receiving end of such outpourings of affection. And frankly, I don't think I earned them. So there's that. But, without making it weird, there's nothing more valuable than people. So love them. Luke Perry, you're obviously missed by many. If I'm feeling this, knowing very little about the man and his work, I can only imagine. Some of the people who worked with him sharing on social media are fairly eloquent. Others are clearly broken up and are just posting photos and, sometimes an emoji, but usually just something to the effect of, I have no words. And while that is certainly, as a person, you want to strive to leave that impact on the world, take care of yourself where possible, too. I'd like to think that if there was anything that could have been done to prevent this, that it was. Doctors are incredibly valuable, but spending your time at doctor's offices is not very fun, nor if you're always running around going, oh, I think I've got this, oh, I think I've got that, nor do they really want you in there all the time. I read the Letterman biography that was published last year, and this was sort of known about him, but I didn't realize to what extent. He was convinced that he had tumors all the time, and he would run around to doctors going, oh, I've got this, oh, I've got that, and they'd be like, no, Dave, you're fine. So when I say take care of your health, I don't say envision the worst and hound doctors and make your life miserable and full of phobias. But we are amazingly strong and amazingly fragile creatures. So just take care of yourself and take care of the ones you love. Boy, did I not want to go down this hippy-dippy road tonight, but that's just sort of where things are at. I look forward to tomorrow covering the world premiere of Captain Marvel. I will say this, not to nitpick, but over the weekend, I read about the world premiere of Captain Marvel and thought, I thought the world premiere was Monday. And this is simply down to weirdness with the studios and their promotion departments, and naming doesn't really matter, but it is weird that over the weekend there was what was ostensibly the world premiere held in the UK. And it appears that it went wonderfully. I don't believe Sam Jackson was there as he is tonight in Hollywood, but Brie Larson was there in a very cool Captain Marvel-inspired dress, and apparently people love it, and my understanding, I haven't seen it, so this is as mild of a spoiler alert as can be. But that said, if you don't want anything about Captain Marvel even potentially spoiled for you, I would say skip the next 60 seconds or so of the podcast and hop back on. Okay, so they're all gone, right? My understanding is that fairly early on in the movie, like within the first hour. There's a tribute to Stan Lee that may or may not, I believe it does include a cameo of sorts. I don't know the details, but everyone who's seen it describes it as really sweet, really heartfelt, and leaving them very sad. And so even in switching topics to Captain Marvel, about which I'm really excited, I'm going Friday. It's when it officially opens. And in fact, while we're still within that minute or so of spoiler time, there has been leaked art that suggests that something happens in Captain Marvel. Something to do with the Kree Skrull War and possibly other Skrull-related elements like some sort of adaptation of Brian Michael Bendis' Secret Invasion storyline, that a major player in the Marvel Universe going back to the very beginning and who's on track to do several more movies, although his contract expires pretty soon, so he's not exactly locked in. But this person may turn out to not be who we think they are. And the story elements that can spin out of that are endless. But I'm going to wait till more people know a little bit more about it before I speculate on this show. Because I've got some ideas, but many of them are sort of spoilerish, so I'll link to the art in the description for tonight's podcast, and you can follow it if you like. And then in a few days, when it's sort of as much in the consciousness as it's going to get, and when I think it's safe to talk about without spoiling anything, I'll discuss what I think this might mean, both for the movies that we've seen in the Marvel Universe and the movies that are going to come after Avengers Endgame and Spider-Man Far From Home, which, interestingly, are going to be the last movies Marvel makes for something like 6-7 months, which for Marvel is quite a respite. And that actually plays into my theory about this character, some other characters that might have a similar condition, similar origin, similar secrets to this character. But again, I'm just not going to go there yet. I'll also link in the description for tonight's podcast to Brie Larson, Captain Marvel, and Sam Jackson, Nick Fury, of course, on the Jonathan Ross Show. My listeners in the UK undoubtedly know who he is. Probably many people outside know him as well. He's basically a worldwide celebrity. He's been a staple of TV in the UK for many years, and long before it was cool to come out and go, oh yeah, I'm a geek. Back when even I was sort of like, oh yeah, comics, sometimes I'm aware of them. Jonathan Ross has always been a very proud and very vocal fan of comics. And in fact, I believe it was in 2007, he released a documentary, I think called Searching for Steve Ditko, or In Search of Steve Ditko, in which he, searches for Steve Ditko, who was a recluse and had a lot of weird ideas that really contributed to that lifestyle. But he also had a ton of ideas that made him an inspiring, just amazing, I want to say illustrator, but obviously he was more than that. That was part of the reason why he left Marvel, were disputes over to what degree he had a hand in actually creating, not just bringing to life with his drawings, but really creating on some other level. And I'm not going to take sides on that, not tonight, other than to say he was a brilliant man and that I certainly had my mind blown as a kid and continue to this day when I see Ditko works. But growing up in a much less glamorous version of New York as I did, and I've mentioned this on the podcast before, and being exposed to Ditko's work on not only Spider-Man, but actually in many ways, especially Doctor Strange, was mind expanding. Not because it looked weird and psychedelic and freaky, which it did, but because it was just amazing to think, oh my God, there's this much creativity in the world. You can have these ideas and express them. The way Steve Ditko did it, both as an artist and as a philosopher, and the way he lived his life are very different than me. A distinctly non-objectivist podcaster. But Ditko always meant a great deal to me, as he did to Jonathan Ross. And Ross, Jackson, and Larson had a very fun time singing a tune from A Star Is Born. So check the link to that out in the description for tonight's podcast episode. Also in the description for tonight's podcast, check out the links to my Patreon, patreon.com/Matt Sager. Not only would I love your patronage, but I'd love any ideas you have about more different gifts I could offer, more tiers of membership, because my Patreon's gone largely ignored this whole time, and I'd like to change that. Similarly, check out my merch store from my buddies at wehavemerch.com. Now this, a lot of thought has gone into it, as is a lot of great design work. There's Matt Sager Podcast t-shirts, hoodies, coffee mugs, and stickers. They all look great, and I suggest you check them out. Also, get in touch with me. You can email matt@mattsager.com or call 646-535-4788. On social media, you can get me just about everywhere. On Twitter, I'm @MattSager. On Instagram, I'm Real Matt Sager. And on Facebook, I've got my personal page, The Matt Sager, my voiceover page, Matt Sager VO, and this podcast page, which you should certainly be liking. Listening to this podcast, right? So like the page. It's facebook.com/Matt Sager Podcast. As for the rest, more social media profiles and links, my articles and blog posts, my voiceover reels and contact info, back episodes of this show, and a lot more, you can find all that at my website, mattsagervoiceover.com.